Welcome to this Considered Opinions podcast.
I'm Dougal.
And I'm Celia. Thank you for joining us. There's a lot of talk at the moment about the culture wars and changing the culture, but most people would struggle to give a clear definition of what culture actually is. And so I'd like to look at what culture is and how it is made.
Most people, if you ask them what is culture, they'd say something like the arts, or they might define it by groups. So they'll say, oh, there's Western culture, there's pop culture, there's Christian culture.
Which is interesting in and of itself, that we feel a need to define culture by niches, shall we say.
It's really just giving examples. It's not really describing the features of culture or the makeup of culture, though.
Yes, so culture is the values the society has, their beliefs, their traditions, and their behaviours. And culture informs the society because it deals with the values, and that influences the behaviours, and that creates the environment that we live in.
So we've got a definition, working definition there. The next question is that a lot of people are asking is, how do we change the culture? How do we influence the culture? Is there a way that we could visualise this process of cultural change?
I think the best way to visualise it would be to remember BBC. Beliefs, behaviour, culture. What you believe dictates how you behave, which creates the culture. As a man thinks, so he is.
So it's starting with the individual, and it's starting inside our own heads.
It's starting with the individual, and because how we think and what we believe, everything comes from that.
So could you say that our beliefs and behaviours are like drops of water in the stream?
So beliefs are the spring, the source of the stream, which then flows down to behaviour, which then flows down to culture.
Yes.
You could also think of it that behaviour is to culture what cars are to traffic. Each individual is part of the bigger picture.
And one of the key things with this is that there are phenomena within traffic, like the formation of traffic jams, which on first glance may not appear to stem from the individual, but without the individual cars, that traffic jam couldn't appear. So it does actually come from the individuals. But when you collect all of those individual actions together, then you get traffic. So the same sort of thing. All your individual behaviours are collecting together to form the culture that we live in.
Yes. You could also look at it, another analogy would be a jigsaw puzzle. Culture is the jigsaw puzzle, and your behaviour is each puzzle piece. They all contribute to the whole.
And you can't see the big picture when you're just looking at the individual, but it is actually contributing.
Exactly. So one of the things that we can do to change the culture is to ask ourselves, what sort of culture do we want? What values do we want? And this is a good thing because culture is not passed down through the bloodstream. It's not innate, it's learned. The government is actually very aware of the power of belief. So propaganda is all about changing how people think. It's about changing their beliefs. And that will change their behaviours. There's an example of this with nudge units.
Oh, the nudge units. Yes, we know about all the nudge units.
And their aim is to modify behaviour. Behaviour modification.
Yes.
So with the nudge units, they want to modify a behaviour. They start with propagandizing, with changing how people think. They understand that will change people's behaviour. Then they will they're planning on ending up with a culture that they want. And this is a tactic that's been used throughout the 20th century.
Well, I can think of an example. It was a propaganda campaign, and it was changing behaviour. It was a good behaviour change, but the Be a Tidy Kiwi campaign, that was a propaganda campaign.
That's a good example, because the other thing to remember is that not everything, just because it's a government propaganda campaign, is necessarily a bad thing. So, yeah, Be a Tidy Kiwi. I personally think that it's a good thing to not litter.
Yeah, it taught us all not to litter, and for a long time you couldn't find litter in New Zealand. And I remember going overseas and being in London, and people would be like, Dougal, why have you got all of this rubbish in your pockets? And it's, well, I can't find a bin anywhere. The point being is that it was a government ad campaign, a propaganda campaign, and it changed people's beliefs, which changed people's behaviour, which meant that New Zealand, for a long time, didn't have a lot of litter. That's wearing off now.
Well, that comes back to its culture is not passed on in the bloodstream, so you do have to consciously choose what beliefs and values you are going to inculcate in those around you in the next generation.
So what are some of the things that we would like to see changed?
That's a very good question, because I think most people could tell you what they don't like.
Yes.
But it's much harder to say what it is that you do want. It's easier to say what you don't like than it is to understand what the values are that created the culture that you do like.
Chesterton talks about this in his book Orthodoxy, that it was important not just to rebel against anything, but you had to know the system that you would not rebel against.
Yes. And so you know what you are working towards. In some ways, it's a much more positive,
constructive
way of approaching things rather than focusing what we don't like. We can focus on what we do want to see, and our behaviours will then contribute to creating that culture. We live in a culture that no longer values integrity and honesty, and that one, I would say, is a big one. It's what you do when no one is watching.
Yes.
Has changed a lot. It used to be that you would behave with honour and integrity because of who you were, who it made you. And now it's what you can get away with.
Yes.
And that is where we get our virtue signalling culture from, is that the belief that if you can get away with it, more power to you, and it's all about appearances, then that leads to a culture of virtue signalling and people doing these empty
performative acts. So it'll be things like some celebrity saying, oh, we need to look after the environment and we need to cut down our emissions, and then in private they're on their private jet.
Exactly. That's a very good example of the virtue signalling. All of these things that we've taken as the outworkings, as the cultural implications, actually link back to the belief that if you can get away with it, it's okay.
Yes.
They all come from that belief.
Yes.
So we need to look at our beliefs first.
So if you've got a movie mogul who wants to use his power to get favours, he's thinking, can I get away with it? Yes. If you have a politician who is claiming to have a degree that he doesn't really have, but it could even be in your day-to-day. And this is where it comes back to it's not just, I mean, we talk about celebrities and politicians there, but it's also us. So I had a boss who once actually just outright said to me, Dougal, look, if all else fails, just lie. And it's that attitude millions of times over, right across the society, that leads to an attitude of just lie.
Yes, exactly. And I like the way you've brought things back to us, because it's easy to talk about politicians.
Point the finger. What's the government going to do?
And celebrities. But it's important to bring it back to us, to what can I do?
Yes.
And that also stops it from being out there, somebody should do something about that attitude that we talk about in our self-responsibility podcast, to bringing it back to self-responsibility and looking at our own belief systems and our own behaviours, and then how they will influence the culture going forward.
There would be other divergent benefits as well if you focused on your behaviours. It's something within your sphere of influence that you can control, and it may actually reduce anxiety as well. So there would be a secondary benefit to focusing on your own beliefs and behaviours, and will end up as a less anxious society.
I think bringing it back to spheres of influence, what we can do, what each of us can do, is a very empowering thought. The flip side that I think it can be off-putting is that it takes time, because how fast the culture will change is how fast we change.
Is it also possibly a little bit daunting to people because they might have to consider, if we want to see cultural change, we have to change. And we've got a culture that says, don't change.
Decide who you are and stick with it. And I think also the other thing is nobody wants to be the first.
But these are all habits that we have.
Well, habits come from your belief systems and your behaviour. Your practiced behaviour is a habit. And so you get your belief and then your behaviour, and then your practiced behaviour becomes your habits.
Okay. So what do we need to remember?
Remember beliefs, behaviour, culture. B, B, C. That is the way forward, and that is the most effective way for us to create the world we want to live in. Thank you for joining us for this Considered Opinions podcast. We look forward to seeing you again next time. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.